5. Look at that. Okay, so I'm going to do a little countdown here. But before we start, is there anything that you want to ask or anything that you want to check in or ask anything before we dive in?
No, let's get going.
Fantastic. All right, here we go. In 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to The Long View, a podcast that takes a closer look at the games people play. Tonight, I am once again your guest host. My name is Jeff Gamble. I am the originator of the Longview podcast and helping out a little bit while TC and Joe are away on hiatus, shall we say. And happy to do that. And I'm joined here tonight by a very special guest who I reached out to because he was kind enough to reach out to me and to Joe on the Longview request episode. So I want to say hello to Mark Fredrickson, who is with me tonight to talk about one of his favorite games. Hello, Mark.
Hello, good evening, Jeff.
Well, thank you very much for being on the show and for responding and for putting your name on the list there and being willing to take the plunge here. I want to let people know behind the scenes that this is the first episode that I'm recording in the sort of post YouTube, Google Hangout world when everything kind of changed. So I want to give a shout out to Mark for being patient as we kind of stumbled our way through trying to figure out how all this was going to work again. And it was awesome of you to try to work through it with me and troubleshoot with me because YouTube kind of changed the way it did things when it comes to these sort of multi-person sort of video podcasts that we do. And then, of course, I want to give a shout out to Joel Eddy, who found StreamYard, which is what we are currently using. And StreamYard is really simple to use, so far as I can tell. And as long as this episode goes well, I'm going to be a big supporter of them because it's very simple, a great interface, and it ties directly to your YouTube account. And from what I can tell, unless there's some sort of time limit on the broadcasting, it seems like it works beautifully. So big shout out to Joel for finding that for me. He's been a great mentor, as listeners of the show know, to me for many years. So thanks to him. So Mark had reached out because he wanted to talk about a game called Bruxelles 1893. This is a game that has been around for a while. And it's one that I really never even had a chance to play until a couple of years ago at the WBC. The game came out in 2013. And the designer is listed as Etienne Esperman. I'm sure I might have butchered that name. Art by Alexandra Roche. And the original publisher is Pearl Games. And this is a really interesting sort of just a classic kind of a modern Euro feel. Would you agree with that, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. Just before we go on, I want to point out that while I volunteered, it was really my goal to have someone more knowledgeable than me talk about this. But I'll throw myself into the breach and see what I can do here.
Oh, you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. This is a great game because it offers lots and lots of different opportunities and paths and ways to score points and ways to think about the game and approach the game. One of the things that struck me immediately about this, before we kind of dive into some more specifics about it, Mark, is this in many ways feels to me like a Stefan Feld game. No disrespect to the designer intended, but it feels very Feldian to me in the way in which there's just so many different ways to score points and do things. And there's almost always something positive that you can do on your turn and lots of different options and opportunities. I don't know if you have had the chance to play any of Stefan Feld's games, but if so, would you agree with that comparison? Or do you think I'm off base there?
No, I certainly think it's apt. I've played Castles of Burgundy. It's the only Feld game that I've played. And so I certainly can agree with you that this game offers a lot of opportunities, which is, I think, by all accounts, Feld standard. At the same time, I wouldn't call it a point salad, and that's something we can maybe get into a little later. But I feel like it's a little bit more demanding than that. It's not the kind of game where you take a turn, you get a point. You place a person, you get a point, and at the end of the game, you get points in little bits and dribbles here and there. You make pretty serious decisions and get either rewarded or blocked by an opponent. So I think it has a little bit more meat than just the point salad kind of moniker might tell us.
Well, I think you might have hit on something there with the sort of the interactive feel, which is something that maybe I
Hmm.
didn't give enough sort of credence to in my quick little comparison there. In that this game can be quite nasty. It
Yeah,
reminds me a
yeah,
little
really
bit
so.
of one of Feld's games called Bora Bora, which can be quite nasty as well, as far as just cutting the legs out from underneath somebody. Well, before we go on too much further, I'm just going to kind of do a little bit of a blurb here talking about the game. This is taken right from the BGG page. So basically, we're in Brussels. It's during the Art Nouveau sort of era. And we are, as players, supposed to be architects who are sort of competing to acquire patrons and get financing and build beautiful buildings and our own sort of personal sort of mansion, if you want to call it that, or it almost looks like a townhouse on your board, with very ornate sort of decorative ironwork and glass work and all this kind of stuff. And so it's got that very sort of Art Nouveau sort of feel to it. The art and illustrations is actually very evocative of that, at least to my mind it is. And that's really the theme here. Like you're sort of competing and you're trying to become the most renowned architect. That being said, I don't feel like a huge connection to the theme during the game personally, but I think that the components of the game and the presentation of the game really do kind of give you a little bit of a feeling of a certain time and a place, primarily because of the art style, I would say. And that's kind of what your mission is. And so you're using sort of a little army of your little assistants, and you're sending your little assistants out to go and basically bid. This is an auction game in many ways, to bid on sort of these rows, I'm sorry, columns of actions that you can possibly take. And when you place out your worker, you're going to get to take that action, but you're also bidding. The bidding part is for these bonus cards that are going to be available at the bottom of each column. And so this is kind of a majority thing. Who spent the most money? Who offered the most money? Who paid the most of their assistance, if you want to think of it that way, and is going to gain this bonus card, which is going to affect your end game scoring. Now, this to me, it was really revolutionary at the time when the game was put out and when I first experienced it, because it was the first Euro that I had played, Mark, that kind of had a build your own scoring sort of mechanism.
Hmm.
That has since been used in many games after this, but this was one of the first ones that I sort of remember where it's like, oh, I can acquire these bonus cards and I can sort of tuck them and not take this immediate sort of benefit, which might be really great for me during the course of the game, but I can sort of sacrifice that benefit and affect my end game scoring, which can have a huge impact on the game. So, as you said, it's very thinky, it's meaty, it's got this cool little Art Nouveau sort of theme, and lots of great decisions. So that's sort of a basic sort of overview of the time, the place, and sort of what you're trying to accomplish in the game. Would you add anything to that, Mark? Is there something that I've forgotten other than the sort of main area of the board where you can also send your dudes?
No, no. I mean, we can get into mechanics a little bit more. In prep for this discussion, I took liberty of kind of reading up a little bit on the Art Nouveau period, and it's interesting to see aspects of this that are brought forward in the game. The Art Nouveau movement was categorized by kind of combining straight lines and frames, things like windows and doorways that merged into flowing dynamic lines. You can really see that in the art presentation. Like you, I think the art was really what kind of brought me into this game. I think if it had a different presentation, I wouldn't be quite so hot on it. But I think Alexander Roche, who also did Trois, did a really fantastic job with just little details that really just throughout the game kind of sell it. And you have nice little touches like meeples with top hats. I mean, how many other games can you say have that particular feature? So I think that's just a real classic mark of this game. These little details all the way down, but it doesn't take itself too seriously either. There's kind of a cartoony aspect to it. So I get the impression that this doesn't hit home for everyone, but I think it's a nice blend of whimsical and serious and artistic and functional all at the same time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that the presentation is really lovely in the game, and I know that there have been some. It seems like this particular artist, when you mentioned Trois and this game, a little bit sort of divisive. There are some people who just don't sort of appreciate that, but this one, I think. I sort of latched onto a little bit more. Troyes is very true to that sort of almost medieval sort of look and the tapestries and things. And people who are fans of that find the artwork to be just really compelling and lovely. And people who maybe aren't fans of that are kind of like, don't really like it that much. You might have the same thing here, but overall, I agree with you. I think it's an excellent job of presenting this kind of very unified sort of visual theme. So, in this game, which plays what is it, 1 to 4, or 1 to 5? I think it's 1 to 5, actually, isn't it?
I don't know. The rule book itself, as published, doesn't contain a solo mode, but it's 2 to 5 in the
Two to
rule book. And
five,
maybe
yes.
there's
Thank you.
a variant or something for solo mode, which would be fun. I should get up.
Yeah, there probably is one, but I think I just
Hmm.
simply misspoke there, Mark, to be honest with you. Yeah, 2 to 5. I think you're right. And the first time I played it, I played a full 5 player game, and wow, that was an experience, and that was a long game. This is definitely a game that can take some time. They have it listed as a 50 to 125 minute playtime, and I would say that's being generous. I mean, I played it as a 3 player game not too long ago, and it took well over an hour to play with 3 players because there is a lot to think about. There's a lot of things to consider as you play. Have you found the playtime to be on the longer end as far as these Euros go, or do you think maybe I'm just playing with some slow people?
No, I mean, I think the playtime is honest. So many times you look on a box and they vastly undersell how long it's going to take to play a game. And I think the listed playtimes are not unreasonable. I think if you had 2 or 3 people who knew it, you could quite conceivably play in an hour and 15. If you had 5 people, again, who are kind of familiar, know what they're doing, you can get out there. I think you could get that one done in 2 hours tops. As you mentioned earlier, like there's always something to do in your turn. So on one hand, you have to kind of optimize that. On the other hand, it's never really the case that you feel so boxed into a corner that you just don't know what you can do. You can always see something. You say, okay, well, maybe I'm not going to sell art this turn. I'm going to go build my building, or maybe I'm going to go get a guy out of the jail or something like that. So you kind of always have something to do, which I think helps keep play moving along. At least it feels, even if it does take longer, at least it feels like it's moving along.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I don't want people to think, and I appreciate you saying that because I don't want people to think that you're ever bored during this game because everything that the other players are doing has an impact on you. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. The game, for being a Euro, there are a lot of like kind of economic markets in this game. Things that, well, people aren't really, taking away what you can do. They're shifting your incentives with everything they do. Everything they do makes something either more or less expensive for you, and changes how you're going to get a payout in some aspect of the game. So it's very much you want to keep an eye on what's going on and be able to jump in at a moment when you see an opportunity. I can talk about an experience I had in a recent playthrough, where I noticed a few turns too late that I had a big opportunity I could have taken and I didn't do it. And I really should have jumped in on that and made some good points and good some money in the game. So you got to keep it. You got to keep your eye on it. You can't just kind of put heads down and do your own game by any means.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I like the way that you put that. It's not that you very often get blocked from doing what you want to do, but often other players' actions will make what you had originally planned more or less attractive.
Mm-hmm.
Often
Mm-hmm.
less attractive, unfortunately, than
Yeah.
what you
Yeah.
wanted to do. And so
Right.
then you're like, okay, well, I could still do this, but if I do this, then I'm not going to get sort of as much out of this turn in a positive sort of way. Well, maybe if I do this instead, okay, that might be better. And so I would say because of the intense nature of the interaction, the game feels a little bit more tactical to me than strategic. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think you want to pick a long-term thing to work towards, particularly with that end game scoring that develops throughout the game. That will help you kind of focus in on a strategy. But yeah, you have to be willing to put that aside for a turn or five even to hop in and take advantage of other moments in the game.
Absolutely, absolutely. I would agree with that 100%. So, before we go along any further, one of the things I think might be helpful as we continue to discuss the game is to sort of go over the different actions that you can take in this game. Would you mind sort of walking us through just sort of a high level overview of what those actions would be that you can take with your little workers?
Yeah, sure. So it might help us talk a little bit about the board. The board comes in two parts. The first part is a fixed board, always the same. It has the victory point tracker on it, and has a few other pieces I'll talk about in a second. The second part of the board is a 5x5 grid where all of the rows are five uh, five columns wide, and they are on one board each. And then you mix up these five, and you put them in order. So if you're thinking about this, what it ends up being is kind of this like Sudoku puzzle, where in any column you're going to have one of five actions, and in every row you're going to have one of five actions. But the kind of the relative order of these things is going to be mixed up for every game. So these five actions are kind of, I would divide them into three groups, kind of that generally correspond to kind of three basic strategies that people are going to do. The first is, as Jeff mentioned, building a building. So each of these artists and architects were known for famous buildings they built in Brussels. As a quick aside, on BGG, there's a really great thread about someone who went to Brussels and took photos of all these buildings that are still standing today. So that's really
That's
worth
great.
tracking down and taking a look at. These buildings are pictured on people's players' boards, and over the course of the game, they'll be taking off tiles from the bottom to the top, kind of simulating building this building from the ground up. So to do that, first you need building materials. And so one of the five actions pictures a person carrying like a beam, a rafter, and you go there and you can get some building materials. And there are four different kinds of building materials, three of which are called the noble materials, and one of which is a wild card material. So you can go and get some noble materials on this main board, and then I'll talk in a second about the wild materials. Um, Later on, you'll use these materials to do building with the second of the five actions on what they call the Art Nouveau board, this randomly oriented board. And there, you turn in building materials and you take a piece off. The price of a building, I think, is again one of these really interesting markets that's going on in the game. So on the main board, there's this what they call the compass. Imagine a clock that has six different places that it can point in two hands. The hands are the same length, but it looks much like a clock. So at any time, these two hands are always going to be pointing at two different spaces. And those spaces define what building materials are valid to use when you're going to build your building. So it might point to the green and the black building material, or they might point to brown and money, or there's even one that has no building material on it, which means you have to use what the other arm is pointing to. And then every once in a while you get lucky and it points at kind of the wild card, one of three different building materials. So when you go to build, you have to look at that compass, that clock face, and say, right now, brown and black are available, and I have these two things, and I can use them to build. It might very well be the case that you want to build, but someone has moved that compass such that you don't have those materials, or it's too expensive to do so.
That
So that's
happens
really,
a lot.
oh, constantly. No,
Yeah.
because
Yes.
after you build, you move that, you get to move those arms in a certain way. You can never have them point to each other, and they have to go clockwise, but you can always have to move one of those arms, so you can say, well, I built, using this random thing, but now I'm going to change it to point to the nothing and force everyone to use glass, and nobody has glass, and so it becomes very hard to build at that point. So yeah, that's a real fun aspect of this. Again, there's this little tiny market where you're like, you're not making the building more expensive in the total number of materials they have to use. But you're changing which materials they're allowed to use, and that can radically change whether or not you can do what you want to do on your turn. So that's the main building loop. Then there's the art loop, where you can produce objects of art. So these, we often call them architects in the game, but the Art Nouveau movement was about connecting all kinds of art. Just art throughout life art should infuse life. It should be connected from your lamp that looks like a peacock to the flowing lines of the woodwork in your house. They kind of had this kind of grand vision of art as this unifying concept. And so not only were they architects, they were also artists. And so you can produce art. Art in this game is in the form of little tiles, one of five different colors. And so you can go to the art action and produce some art. Then later on, you're going to want to sell that art. And so the fourth of the fifth of these 5 actions is selling art. And again, here's a little market. So again, on the main board, the fixed board, there's a what is it? I guess it's 7 by
A little
7 grid.
square, yeah,
Yeah,
and there's a little floating square, which is brilliant. So,
yeah.
yeah, it's really cool. So, sorry I interrupted you, but I always
No, no.
geek out over the clock arms, the clock hands, and how that works, and then this floating color market square that I'll let you describe because you're doing such a fantastic job. So, go ahead. Sorry to interrupt. I just
Hey,
got
oh no, no
I
problem.
got
I
all
love
freaked
this.
out there.
No, this is one of my favorite parts too. So so it's a 7 by 7 grid, and on the columns it runs 6, 4, 2, 0, 2, 4, 6 for victory points, and on the rows it runs 6, 4, 2, 0, 2, 4, 6 for money. Okay, and so on top of this grid, which is printed on the board, there's this little 3 by 3 tile. On the 4 corners are each of the main 4 colors of art: pink, green, yellow, and blue. And in the center is black. So when you want to sell art, the location of this tile tells you how many points given by the columns and how many dollars, how many Belgian francs you're going to get based on the row, given the color's location. And what's neat about this is you get to kind of move the market around. So when you go to sell, taking the action on this Art Nouveau board, you may move this tile the number of spaces equal to the number of pieces of art you currently own. This is before you sell. So you can look at the amount of art you have, and you can go over and look at the board and say, if I could move the slider over 4 spaces, I could move pink to the 6-6 spot. So if I sold some pink art, I could get $6.06. And money is very tight in this game. So getting $6 is huge, and getting 6 points is big as well. So you might say, I'm going to jump in this, and I'm going to sell my pink art. And so you go over there, you slide the slider over, and now pink is at 6.6. But as a consequence of this, you've moved the price of green as well, and the price of blue, and the price of yellow. And so someone who wanted to sell something, and before blue was maybe selling at a good price, but now you've moved the slider, you've again moved that market and made it less available for someone else to sell. The other aspect of this too is that the market for art overall is limited. There are 2 little windows above this 7 by 7 grid, and it can hold 2 pieces of art of different colors. So at any time it might hold, for example, yellow and green. And at that time, the market is not interested in buying yellow and green because it already has it. However, you could sell a pink or a blue. So you can find yourself in a situation where you might be able to move the slider to a really great place for a piece of art you own, but if that art is already on display, you can't sell it. Moreover, when you're deciding what to sell, you look around the table and you say, Jeff has got yellow. If I sell yellow now, he can't sell it next term, so I can block him. And so it's just, you're very much looking around the table, seeing what people have, what they're doing. Is someone else working the art line? What else do they have? How can I move the slider now? And so it can become a real big way to turn, this kind of another little loop of points where you go and you get art and you produce art, and then you go and you sell art and get points of money. And it's a nice little counterpoint to the rest of the game. I think it just goes in very different directions than a lot of other kinds of generally Euro games do. They don't have these kind of economic aspects. And I think that's a real fun aspect of this game. So that brings us to the last of the 5 actions that are available on the Art Nouveau board, which is, I love the icon of this one. It's a top hat with a little mustache under it.
Yeah.
I believe the rule book says it's going to the opera, and you go to the opera and you meet with notable people, and these notable people are represented by one of 5 cards that's available on a little market display. The usual kind of first one costs 0, second one costs 1, and so on and so on. And so you can hire or enlist the patronage of one of these notables by going to the opera. And again, this is an opportunity where you're facing this decision. You can say, I'm going to take the bonus that this person gives. So for example, this person might award you 2 of the white wild building pieces, or the person might move you up some tracks that we haven't talked about yet and help you with some kind of scoring aspect. And you say you have 2 choices. You can just take the bonus one time, put the guy aside and not think about it anymore, or you can take it and forego getting that bonus right away, but in future turns you can get that bonus over and over and over again, and you can reactivate that card. However, there's an additional cost, which is at the end of the game you have to pay a salary. So if you don't pay a salary, it costs you points at the end of the game. So you have to kind of balance, is it worth hiring the person? Usually you want to hire them kind of early in the game so you can get their bonus over and over again. Or maybe you just want to take the bonus one time and just get that thing immediately in this round so you don't have to worry about getting it in a future round. So it's a nice little kind of, how much do I want to invest in my engine versus how much do I want to just grab for this round and keep going and keep pushing. So it's another little fun aspect of the game.
Yeah, it is. And it's one of those, again, sort of directions that you can go because for each of these things that you're basically describing here, there is going to be opportunities for end game scoring, right? So if you go heavily into making pieces of art, you can set yourself up so that you're going to be scoring a boatload of points at the end of the game for all of the pieces of art that you have collected and not sold, right?
That's
Or
right.
if you have a bunch of patrons that you have hired into your service, yeah, you're going to have to pay their salaries, which is a bit of a bummer, but you can set yourself up so that you're getting points for every person that you have hired into your sort of staff, right? So uh,
Yep.
all of these different things are going to also be decisions that you're going to have to make about how do I want to best try and score a lot of points at the end of the game. So you can score points by building that sort of personal mansion on your board by putting out your building pieces onto the sort of modular board that was described earlier, which is also has another interesting fact. Which so like if I build a building the way Mark has described here, and I take one of those little tiles off of my board, sort of revealing a little bit of the individual structure that my architect is known for. I'm going to place that on that sort of randomized board where you select the actions. And if another player goes and selects the action where my building is, I get sort of this little secondary bonus. So if you go to collect resources, well, guess what? I get to collect a resource. If you go and produce paintings, I'm going to get to produce a black painting. And black paintings are really important because of two things. Number one, they don't, because black is in that central position on that 3x3 tile that Mark described just a minute ago. You're not going to always make a killing on victory points and money, but it's always going to be solid. And if you're in the position like Mark described for me, where I've got like, 5 yellow works and yellow is in the shop window, and there's no one who's going to cover yellow because no one wants to make my paintings available to be sold or my beautiful sculpted chairs or whatever piece of art it is. If I have a black painting, I can cover myself. So I could cover the yellow with the black, and then, perhaps when it comes around again, now I can sell my yellow again, right? So there's all of these really, really interesting things that can happen. If someone comes to an action space where I've built one of my buildings to sell paintings, I'm going to get victory points based on the number of pieces of art that I have. So there's all these different secondary benefits that can take place, which are also very important. So even where you're placing your little building tiles is a decision. Like there's almost nothing in this game that is an auto decision, which I find to be really, really interesting and very refreshing. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's given we haven't even talked about the bidding or the
Mhm.
area majority aspects of the game yet.
Yeah, yeah.
So like, that's one thing. I find a little difficult to teach this game sometimes because everything has, it's not horribly complicated, but there are interlocking gears here. And you turn one, you're gonna inevitably turn the other one. And so if I'm talking about actions and I don't remember to talk about putting on a building tile, that's important though, right? And that has repercussions later on when other people want to go to somewhere where I have a building. Yeah, I've seen some really interesting dynamics develop around those buildings. This might be a good time to talk about the area majority scoring, just because I see it happen there a lot. So the randomly laid out Art Nouveau board with these 5 actions and 5 rows and 5 columns, only a portion of that is available in any round. The start player gets to position a little marker that shows, based on a card that flips over a randomly drawn card, gets to position a little marker that shows what's inbound and what's out of bound. And usually it's kind of like 1 or 2 rows and 1 or 2 columns. So it can get pretty tight on that little part of the board. And even above and beyond people blocking you, because it is basically, this kind of classic blocking with worker placement. Additionally, there's little shields that form at the intersections of 4 action spots. And if one of those shields is completely surrounded, the player who placed the majority or tied for the majority will get a certain number of points. And so just back to the building thing, sometimes it can be the case where you put out a building and people don't want to go there because it would give you a bonus. But then that prevents an area majority to score that you want to score, because if it doesn't complete, if it only has 2 or 3 instead of 4 workers around it, it doesn't score at all. And so you could be sitting there going, oh, I really want to score this place where I have 2 out of the 3 things. And if anyone goes there, I will score points. But nobody goes there because it's yours. And so you end up going there yourself, and you don't get any bonus for going there yourself. So it's
Exactly.
very
It's
interesting.
very unsatisfying. Yeah, you're like, fine, I'm gonna go see my own building. It's like, yeah, it's definitely one of those tense kind of moments, and there's also that aspect of trying to sort of guess. Because there are so many different ways to score points when you're putting out those buildings, you're trying to kind of read the table, and you're kind of like, all right, how many people are really going for the producing art sort of route? Because then I want to put my building on one of those spaces, because if that's really what people are going for, then that means that my building is probably going to get visited more often than not. And so that's a whole nother layer of decision that you have to make. And then yeah, sometimes you got to go to your own building, and it's very
Yep.
unsatisfying because it's like a staycation. You're not
Yep.
really
Yep.
you're not
Yep.
really going anywhere. We're just going to go to our own building just so that you can get those points. And if you recall Mark talking about those cards, there's bonus cards that are at the bottom of this board that's created by those action selection strips, and then also some of the sort of patron cards that you can get at the opera. They move you on 2 separate tracks that we haven't really talked about yet. And one of those tracks is how many points do you score when one of those shields is surrounded by meeples. So, okay, I'm scoring 3 points every time that happens. My opponent's only scoring 2 points every time that happens. And so there's a whole bunch of decisions to make there. And then the other track that you're moving up is in reference to that sort of person strategy, if we want to call it that, whereby if you hire people instead of just using them for a one-off benefit and bring them into your employ, you have a certain number of cards that you can activate every round of the game. And the higher up on that track you are, the more people you can activate. And so there's just so many different things that you kind of need to keep an eye on to see what other players are doing, but also to think about yourself as the game is evolving and things are moving forward, and you're trying to position yourself to make the best choices that you can. Because, as Mark said, you're never really going to be completely locked out of anything. But boy, this wonderfully optimal move that you had planned now is completely suboptimal. And you're going to have to try to figure out, well, what could I do instead? And so there's a lot of sort of optimization that goes on in this game. And I don't want to use the term min-maxing because I know that freaks a lot of people out. But, I'm saying optimization, min-maxing. Yeah, it is kind of that. But it's a fun puzzle. And there's a lot of tension, right? Because all of these things are happening as people are putting out their assistance. And so you might be planning the timing of how you want to put your actions together this round. And then someone will play something. All of a sudden, there's a run on building materials. No one's been building anything. And there's a run on building materials. And you're like, I was going to sell this piece of art because that color is available. And boy, this would be a good time for me to do it. But if I do that and somebody else selects the last building material spot, then I could be stuck there. What do I do? And then you have to sort of change your priorities on the fly. And I think that's one of the delicious kind of elements of tension in this game. Would you agree with that, Mark?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I have never seen it happen, but I've always kind of been interested to try a strategy where I like control one building material, so the pieces are finite. So you could potentially go get all the glass, or like 4 of the 5 players can have all the glass pieces, and somebody needs glass, it's not even there to have. So you could really, lock someone out, in a very, very mean way. But it doesn't feel mean, at least to me. Like this is not a game where you say, haha, I've, broke it into your mansion and stolen your beautiful chair. You're just saying, oh, I sold a chair that looks a lot like that chair, and
And
nobody else
now
wants your chair now.
nobody wants your stinking chair. That's right.
Yep.
The
You
people have
sit
had
on it
enough
while
of
you
the
wait.
chairs. Enough of the chairs already. Give us something different. I want a table, and you don't make tables.
Exactly.
And so, yeah. What would you say about one of the criticisms that I've heard leveled at the game is that, especially when it comes to the art sort of strategy, that because when you uh, produce a work of art, you're basically just picking a tile from a pile blind, and whatever you get, you get. And so if I've got 3 yellow pieces of art already, guess what? I got a 4th, and it still does me absolutely no good. And I've heard people and seen on some of the forums, like people complaining that sort of random luck driven element soured them a little. Do you feel that that's a fair criticism or no?
Yeah, I think it's a fair criticism in that some people have higher tolerance for these kinds of luck aspects and some people have lower. There is a mechanism in the game where people who pass early in the round ends when everyone passes. People who pass first get a little bonus tile, and that lets them look at more art. They can, if you have 2 of these little end of round markers, you can look at 3 pieces of art and keep 1. It would be easy enough, I think, to include a house rule where everyone just starts with a take 2, return 1 kind of strategy, or you could add a little display of 2 art tiles and you can always take from that, or a random draw. I can absolutely agree with people. It doesn't bother me personally, but I think it would be an easy solve for a house rule. So I would hope that that wouldn't prevent people from playing the game, because otherwise it's fairly low luck, right? It's some initial setup. It's some of these patron cards, some of these end of round cards, and it's these art tiles. And at least with the end of round cards and the patron cards, you see those pretty far in advance, so you can kind of work around that. And then if you wanted to add something similar for art, I think that'd be easy to do at least.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think that I don't know that the criticism is completely fair because of that passing tile, right? The passing
Mm-hmm.
tile, I mean, that just has to become part of your strategy if you're going into art heavily, right? And there's also benefits to passing early because you're going to get more money. You get $1 more. Woo, $1.
it,
But as
it
you
makes a
said,
difference. It
as you
makes a
said, it
difference.
makes a difference, right? But you're absolutely right. Money is super tight in this game. You're going to get a little bit more money, and you're also, as a person who is a purveyor of fine arts, your income is also tied to how many pieces of art that you have in front of you when you pass. So you can sort of set yourself up, even though there's some randomness. You can set yourself up so that if you pass perhaps early or first on those first couple of rounds, you're going to really, as you explained, eliminate that sort of randomness because you're going to get to look at several tiles and then pick one. Plus, you're going to have more money probably than anybody else at the table, which is going to help you in other areas of the game as well. So, yeah, I thank you for going over that because it is one thing that I've heard some complaints about and rumblings and grumblings. And so, I did want to kind of discuss that a little bit. The last sort of area that I think there's 2 areas, I guess I should say. No, three. There's
Oh, they keep
a
coming. They keep
fanatical
coming.
dedication to the Pope, these fine red robes, and yeah, no, 3, no, 4 things. Yeah, I think there's 2 things left that I think are worth sort of bringing up, and the first is at the end of every round, you're going to take a look at those meeples that you've placed out, not just to see what shields have been surrounded, but also for the bonus cards at the bottom that I referenced earlier. And that's where the money really can come in,
Mm-hmm.
because depending on how much money you've bid, whoever has bid the most money is going to get the benefit of being able to grab that card. And that card is either going to give you a powerful one-time benefit, like, ooh, you get to move up 2 on the activate a person track, or like you said, you're going to get 2 of the wild resources that you can use. This is awesome. Or it's going to show a little silhouette of the sort of the little fountain. The is it really called mannequin piss or is it mannequin piece? I don't know how you pronounce it, but it's
I
the little kid peeing.
Yeah, is the iconic peeing boy statue? Yes,
Yes,
and
the
that is
iconic
there's
peeing
also
boy.
the first player marker, which I always love.
Yes, exactly,
Pass that
exactly.
around.
And if you take that and you tuck it under your player board, that's going to give you more points. For every one of those little figures that you see there, it's giving you more points at the end of the game, which is really cool because it acts as like a multiplier for all intents and purposes. So
Mm-hmm.
if I have 5 people in my employ and 3 cards tucked under, now I'm going to be getting 3, 4 times the 5, and so that's 20 points right there. It's really, really powerful. And so that is decided by who spent the most money in each column. And I find that to be another really interesting part of the game. What have you seen as far as that goes? Like, how big of a piece of the puzzle are those bonus cards for the sole purpose of end game scoring? I mean, how important are those to you, Mark?
So I have tended not to go for them, but I don't know if that's a great strategy. So when you're placing your worker on the Art Nouveau board, each worker you place has to come with a bid of at least 1 Belgian franc. And then at the end, you total up the number of people in the column, and the person gets the card. And so sometimes you can kind of come out with a big, strong bid at the beginning. Oh, I really want this one because I actually have to move up the architecture track and make my buildings worth more at the end of the game. Or I really want to get this double bonus points. So most of the cards have either 0 or 1, and then a few of them have 2 for your end of game victory points that you can get by tucking it. So maybe you really want to get that to get your patron bonus up or something like that. So yeah, I think it adds a nice dimension to it. And sometimes you can find yourself where you bid strong for one thing and then you just don't have any money to place workers later, and you're gonna have to go do another action, yet another set of actions we haven't talked about yet. But yeah, it definitely adds this dimension because anytime so you spend most of your time probably placing on the Art Nouveau board because that's where most of the action is. And at any time you're thinking about the action you want to do, you're thinking about how much you want that thing at the bottom of the column, compared with how much money you have right now and how much you expect to get over the course of the round. And then you're also looking at, oh, do I want to grab the spot for the area majority? So I've noticed that, for example, I'll often put down minimal bids in center columns because that puts my worker by more possible area majorities, but maybe I'll put high bids on the edges, because I really want a card like that. So it's you kind of find yourself kind of sometimes bidding high in interesting places for things you wouldn't have gone for just because you see an opportunity too. Because the last person to place in the column has a lot of information about what the bids are. There's no second round of bidding for anything. It's you put your money in with your worker, and at the end of the round, you see what everyone did. And so the person who goes last has a lot of information about how much something will cost. They can bid just enough to tie to get it exactly, or they can bid more to make it exclusive so that no one else gets it. So there's a lot of decisions in that, particularly late in the round, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last person in that column really does have the hammer because they can decide to outbid everybody or they can go for a friendly tie. But even the thing I like about this is that even the friendly ties aren't friendly. Okay,
No.
because you both get the one-off benefit of whatever's on the card, but nobody gets the card, so nobody gets to tuck it. So if I was really counting on that card because it was going to help me with my in-game scoring on, say, the number of pieces of art that I have, well, yeah, I'm going to get the one-time benefit. Yeah, that's lovely, but I just got sort of boned out of being able to get the end game scoring card that I really desperately wanted. So even the friendly ties can leave a little bit of a bitter taste in your mouth, which just kind of goes to speak to the competitive nature of the game and the interactive nature of the game. Much more so than the typical sort of blocking interaction that you get in something like Agricola or something like that. Because here,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of those sort of calculations, and you just summed them up beautifully. So I'm not going to repeat what you just said. The other area of the board, yes, but wait, there's more. Now, how much would you pay? I'd pay a lot of francs.
Yeah.
There's a whole nother area of the board that's on the main board, which is also interesting. And this is where you can send your workers without having to attach a bid to them. So, and it's really an interesting area. So, I, for example, can go and send a worker to this area on the main board that is going to give me money equal to whatever the market card was that was flipped. If you remember, Mark referred to a card that's flipped at the beginning of every round, which sort of is going to set the parameters of what actions are available over on the Nouveau board. And it also is going to tell you how much money you can get for visiting this market sort of space, right? So I can basically go and get myself a nice infusion of cash. It could be as much as $6 or $7, or it could be as low as 2 or 3. So depending on what card's been flipped, there's going to be a lot of incentive to get there, right? There's another area that allows you to do any of the actions that you would have on the Nouveau board without having to pay money for a bid. So you think, okay, sweet, I'm going to go here because I don't have to spend money. Very true. Very awesome. However, no chance at the bonus card at the bottom. No chance at surrounding a shield and getting bonus points there. So that has a cost, right? It might not be a cost in francs, but it's going to be a cost in your opportunities to score points, which I think is a really interesting design choice. There's an area where you can activate your people cards. So I can go there and I can activate all the people that I've hired, and they are going to do different things for me. They might help me move up on one of those 2 tracks we mentioned. They might give me just $5. I think everybody starts with a card that gives you $5. So if you activate that card, you get an infusion of cash, and $5 is a lot in this game. So cool. All right. And then the other really interesting thing about these spaces is people can go to them over and over and over, but each time you go, there's going to be an increased requirement for the number of workers that you have to expend, right? Now, there's a slightly different rule for the 4 and 5 player game, but the basics of how it works is if I'm first in, I place 1. If Mark goes to the same spot to get the infusion of cash, he's going to have to put 2. The next person that goes is going to have to put 3. And so that next person could be you again. Like, so I could go and put 1 worker out, get $5. Mark comes in, puts 2 workers out, gets $5. I could put 3 workers out then after him and get another $5. However, that's probably all of my workers. So that's all I'm going to accomplish that round. So in a 4 and 5 player game, you basically double that formula. So 2 people can put out 1, and then people have to start putting out 2, and then people have to start putting out 3, in sets of 2. But it basically is this increased cost for taking these actions. And then, just to make things even more interesting, whoever has used the most of their assistants up on that main board gets kind of, they don't say sent to jail, but yeah, it basically feels like you lose a guy to jail. And so one of your workers has to go to the courthouse and sort of explain himself, Lucy, you got some splaining to do. So you have to send your worker there, I guess, to explain why they're doing all of this or whatever. And so they're kind of stuck in this limbo until either a card that you acquire frees them, or you can there are different ways that you can free these people. They're usually related to the bonus cards or the people cards that are going to give you those workers back. And so hey, here's another whole, but wait, there's more. Here's another whole way to sort of strategize about the game, because one of the end game scoring conditions is how many people do you have? How many of your workers do you have at the end of the game? And then you're going to score points for them. So if I can get all of my people out of this sort of little questioning jail area, whatever you want to call it, and have a lot of end game scoring bonus cards tucked under that, I can score points just for having people. So there's so many different things that you can do and ways to approach this. Am I forgetting anything on that main board, Mark?
No. There's these 4 actions, one of which lets you like duplicate anything else, so it's pretty powerful in that way. One of which gets you access to the people you've already hired. You don't get to use them otherwise, basically. And you get some random building materials and you get some money. And those are all pretty sweet deal. And as you say, though, it might look like it's free, particularly if no one's there. You say, oh, nobody's there. I don't have to pay any money. I don't have to put out 1 worker. I can go get $6 from the stock market, or I can go activate my people and I can get $5 from George Brugman, and I can get something else from another another worker, I can get a couple extra building pieces or something like that. But as you say, at the end of the round, you're kind of playing chicken with your opponents. Like, who's going to put
Yeah,
out
you are. Yeah.
more, right? Like, if I see my opponent has got one out, well, I can put out one, and maybe somebody else will. Then he'll put out two, and I'll be okay. Or he's already got two, so I am definitely safe to put out one. Then
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, well, I really want to put out another one. Then we both lose one. So he's, I'm a little bit worse off, but he's no better off. And then, he puts out another one. He's like, oh, okay, well, I can put out a third or something. Or, I'll have rounds where I'll say to myself, well, I'm only going to lose one. So I might as well just go to all the spots. Like, I'm not even going to go to the other board at all. I'm just going to send all my guys out, and they're going to work every back alley and, shake every hand and try to, smooth their way to these wild building points and get me money in the stock market with, speculative investments or whatever. And yeah, I'll just put all my people over there, and oh, one guy's gone. So be it. Too bad. I didn't spend any money to do it. So yeah, you can kind of load out that whole way, or you can kind of pick and choose, or you can kind of avoid it entirely and try to maximize, just not risk losing any workers and try to get as many workers as you can. Because again, like any worker placement game, pretty much the more workers you have, the more you do, and the more you're getting out there and making things happen. And it can be, it can be huge. An extra turn in a round can be really big if you can get a worker out and your opponents can't. It puts you a move ahead right away.
Yeah, no doubt about that. That's all very true. And, again, I like how you highlighted the idea of, friendly ties, not. We both lose.
Right.
It's friendly in that we all lose.
Right.
And I really like that. I like the idea of that game of chicken that you talked about. And I also have been in the exact same position as you, where it's like, hey, I don't care if I lose a guy. And so that sort of frees me up to not have to worry about that, because you don't lose as many workers as you played more than. So I might have played 3 workers more than anybody else. I'm still only going to lose 1. And so that might be an acceptable loss for me for that round. That might be okay. And I've seen that happen sometimes when the action selection area on the Nouveau board is particularly small. There are some times when that initial card flip tells you to put this. It's like a cool little. It looks like a carpenter's square, right? And it sort of defines which rows and columns are going to be open, as Mark discussed earlier. And so sometimes it's a nice, large, juicy, chunky area, and sometimes it's kind of a small area. And so if everybody has a lot of workers, but the area is kind of small, well, guess what? Not everybody's going to get to put their workers out because there's literally not enough room. So then all of a sudden the main board becomes a real hotspot because, well, I've got the workers. I want to do something with them, but I might end up losing one. And so you see people playing chicken between the Nouveau board and the main board, because it's like, okay, well, I'm going to go to the Nouveau board and snap up $6. Oh man, now it's going to cost me 2 to go there. I really, okay. Maybe I'll go there next, but then that means they might go and take the only selling art spot that's left available, and I really need to sell this piece of art, and what should I do? So there's all kinds of tension in the game. I would describe this game as a very, very tense affair, and tense in a good way, at least to me. Would you agree with that description?
Yeah, I think so, because you have to be tactical, like we were talking about earlier. So you're always kind of looking ahead to your next. You've planned at least that far ahead. And you're saying, all right, I really want to go to that building materials where I can place a worker and I can bid on the particular card I want, and it will also help me with the area majority. And then suddenly somebody else, goes there, and you get that feeling, that tightness in your hands and your back when I didn't get what I wanted. So you think about the next thing, you're like, oh well, now I have to go to I still can build, but I have to go to the Brussels board, the main board, and maybe that's going to put me in contention to lose a worker. And tension again. And where's the art market today? And where's it going to go when that person sells? Because I think that person's going to sell. And where are those arms pointing to? And what are they going to point to next? Because they move about in a very predictable way. So next turn, I'm either going to have to pay with brown or black, and I only have brown. Should I get a black? Because it might move on to green. And if I anticipate it right, I'll have the stuff. But if I don't, I won't. You don't. Yeah, it's a very tense game in that way. But I don't feel it. It doesn't feel punishing in the same way as like an Agricola, where you're like, I didn't feed my people; they're all dead. My children are dying. It's I didn't sell the chair. Like,
Yeah, I didn't sell the chair. No, that's a great point, and that's I think that might be you might have hit on it, Mark. Why I kind of compared it to a felt game, because it's tense, it's tight, but it never feels like you just blew the whole game. The way it can in a game like Agricola or something like that, right? No, I
Yeah,
agree with
yeah,
that 100%. There's always something you can do that's positive. It's just a question of how positive, right? How
yeah.
positive is it going to be? And how much are people going to mess with what my plan was? And how well can I adapt? And I think that's one of the things that I really enjoy about this level of a tactical game. And I would put this up on the high end of the spectrum for me of just really great tactical gameplay. How quickly can I adjust and adapt and think on the fly and respond and read the table and react to what's going on. It's just a blast to play and try to puzzle that whole thing out. And that's one of the things that I find to be like super enjoyable and agreeable about this game. One of the things that we have not yet talked about. No, it's not another area of the board. No, it's not another way to score points. We're actually done with that. I do want to talk about player count because I've played this game at 2, 3, and 5. I actually have never played 4. Do you have a preferred player count? And if so, what is it? Why? What do you think?
Hmm, that's a good question. I will play this with any player count. I will happily pull it out. I think it scales really well. In the two-player version, each player puts out a neutral worker to block some spaces, so it tightens up the board nicely. The mechanic where the card flips at the beginning of the round and the bracket is placed to limit the amount of spaces helps scale the game well, so you don't have too many places for a certain group or too few for a certain player count. And as you mentioned, there's a couple other rules that just loosen up the board a little bit at the higher player counts. I think it works great. And again, I think it plays quick enough that it's not the thing where, you add some time for every player you add, but you're not, multiplicatively adding time. It's not, some sort of ever increasing amount of player time because every player has to now think about what every other player is doing in a kind of increasing way. Everyone, they look around, they consider their options. There's usually plenty of them. Some are better than others. They pick the one they want, goes on to the next player, and that adds some time, but it doesn't, it doesn't balloon in any kind of sense. So I think it plays great. My wife and I, this is one of our favorite games to play together. So we'll always play. We play two-player all the time.
Yeah, I found the two-player game to be a lot of fun as well. In that in the same ways that you're describing. My only mild area of disagreement with your assessment, Mark, would be that I feel that the heavy building strategy is more limited in a 4 and 5 player game, and that's
Really?
because it becomes really difficult to predict where those arms are going to be on that clock.
Mm-hmm.
Because it can shift so dramatically that you can end up having all these great building materials, and then someone moves it to the area where you pay $3 for each material you have to use, and you're like, I don't have any money, so I got the
Mm-hmm.
building materials, I don't have the money. And then you wait and you see, okay, well, maybe I see all the money that she's got. So maybe she's actually thinking about building because she has the brown and she's got the cash. I think she's going to build. So if I just hold on one round, she's going to build. And then, she can't move the hands to the same spot, which means that one's going to move over here. Okay, I'm good. It's going to end up pointing probably at brown and blue, and I'm going to be all set, right? And so, sure enough, she builds, and you're like, ha ha ha, here we go. And then the next person unexpectedly builds, and you're like, oh, but I don't have any of that color. I found the building strategy to be more frustrating at the higher player counts. Now, I could be wrong. I'd be curious what listeners would want to say when we post this episode, whether or not they agree or disagree with me that the building strategy seems to be a little bit more difficult to tackle at higher player counts. But that's been at least my impression. Everything else, I think, as you said, scales brilliantly, super easy to do. Now there is the wild building resources that Mark has mentioned a couple of times, but I'll be honest, a lot of times I ignore those, and there's an in-game reason for it, which is that when you build one of your building tiles and you put it out on the Art Nouveau board, if you used all noble materials, right, meaning the colored wooden resource cubes and or money, you're going to score, I believe it's 5 points every single time. And that's an awesome amount of points. Like, that's great. If you used any of the wild resources, you get bupkis, right? So you still get to put your building out, and that's a positive thing, but you're giving up 5 points every time you do it. So I've seen people use wild resources very effectively simply to clear their board, maximize their architect point scoring track, and just score a boatload of points at the end. So I've seen it done, but for me, for whatever reason, I kind of shy away from the wild resources simply because I feel like I'm giving up so many points during the game by sort of quote unquote cheating and using those that I'm not really getting the full bang for my buck that the building strategy can offer. So it could be just my misconception of how wild resources can be useful. But that's kind of the reason why I kind of am hedging towards not really loving the building strategy when you're at the 4 and 5 player count. Have you had any experience with this kind of issue that I'm bringing up here, Mark? And if so, is it my own sort of prejudice against the wild resources that's hurting me here? Or, do you sort of see or understand the point? What do you think?
Oh, I absolutely see where you're coming from, right? Because what you can do is, decided by these arms, and if only one person can move them, the two options that you're going to see next time. There's no choice. There's no possible way you would miss that. But if you have a third person, there's like four options and then eight. You just don't know what's going to happen as they get more people. So you're absolutely right about that. On the other hand, I do think that those wild resources are particularly useful and shouldn't be undersold. And I think this also kind of applies to the art as well, that it can be really useful to build up a collection of resources, be it art or be it the building materials, and just have those available. So I have tended to do this, where I go out and I get something and then I've got, glass and brick, I'm going to go build right away. Okay, I mean, that's not a bad idea. I get a building out, someone gets to place a piece on it, I get something for it. But maybe what I want to do is start collecting a small pile of materials. And that way, in the future, I can be resilient no matter where it's pointing. I always build when I want to build. Particularly, if on the first turn there's a lot of materials actions available, that'd be something to really spot about the board. So look around and say, what's easily available right now? Maybe I want to go out in the first round and grab 3 building materials wild building materials before anyone gets there, and then I'm going to try to take advantage of as many other building materials and play a longer game about that. So I think there's ways to do that. And likewise with the art, if I got a bunch of art just kind of sitting in front of me, almost no matter what is being sold in the market, I'm going to have at least one thing that's available right now, and I can jump in right when the market is to my advantage. And if I have a lot of art, then I can move the marker around. So maybe kind of building up some stocks could be a good strategy. And again, it's not something I've done a lot, but I did see someone do this where he just constantly had white building materials in reserve, and then he would go out and get the nobles as he could, but he was never blocked from building when he wanted to, because he always had at least something that he could do with that. So I think it's kind of this luck mitigation again, where you're doing things that even if you get a bad tile draw, even if you get blocked from the spot you want in the art, you can always you can roll with that punch and you say, all right, it wasn't what I wanted to do, but I've got a almost as good backup plan, and maybe I'll use that to also put the screws to my opponent in some other way.
Well, thanks for sharing your thoughts about that, because it's something I've been curious about as to whether or not I've been undervaluing the wilds or overvaluing the nobles. And you bring up a really interesting point about the idea of stockpiling for the first round or two, which is something that, as you said, is very difficult to kind of get yourself to do, because when you see an opportunity, you want to pounce, you want to be like very cat-like and like, I'm going to pounce on that because I can score 5 points and I can do this, and woohoo, everything's working out. Everything's coming up, Jeff. And you're really excited about it, but maybe in the long run, it's not the best thing to do. So I haven't really considered that. So thanks for sharing that. One of the other questions that I had for you is something I used to ask on the show quite a bit, which is there anything about this game that you don't like or wish was different? What would you change if you could?
Yeah, I have an answer to this. I find the art so engaging. Art Nouveau, Art Deco are some of my favorite styles, and architecture and art, and so that draws me in. But I don't find there's really any creative expression in the game. Like, our art is just flipping a tile over, and oh look, I made a yellow art, or I made a green art. Like that doesn't feel very creative. I think it'd be fun if there was some sort of this every round a card flips over and people are looking for this combination of motifs, and you pluck things out and combine them on a little mini board or something, and that becomes your art, and there's something creative about it. I think it's a missed opportunity with this game, is to engage with that kind of creative expression a little bit more and um, connect the art theme to the mechanics a little bit more. The building is there for sure. I think the art production is a little bit weaker, so that's something I would like to see.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting idea, because one of the things that I really admire and respect about this game is it has beautiful mechanics. Like, it has some
Mm-hmm.
innovative mechanics. It's got some, that art market square, the arms on the building, the little T square that's set out. I mean, I don't know how many times that a card flips over and it's like, oh, I can set this at, coordinate 2-4 or 4-2. And oh, looky here, if I place this here, I just kind of cut out a bunch of your buildings. And so I
Yep.
think I'm going to do that, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
it's got so many awesome parts and pieces to it. But yeah, the theme, that was one of the things I said sort of offhandedly at the beginning of the episode. The theme to me is not strong in this one,
No.
but, aside from the art, not the art mechanic. I agree with you about that. I'm talking about just the presentation art. And so I think that, yeah, you're right. I think anything that would kind of draw more of a direct connection between the game and the theme, I think would be absolutely fantastic. And so I don't have anything myself that I can contribute as creatively as you did, but yeah, that sort of mini game idea sounds fantastic. So thanks for your thoughts about that. So we've talked about player count, we've talked about the innovative things that the game offers, and all of the different actions you can take. We've talked the strategic versus tactical thing that always needs to be kind of touched on. Is there anything about the game that you wanted to sort of highlight or talk about before we sort of draw ourselves to a close on this discussion of Brussels? What is it, 1893?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did. I wanted to kind of pull back a little bit and think about like what role this game has in a collection, or kind of what role this game would have, and as a person who's kind of coming into the gaming world or has been in the gaming world for a while. I think it occupies this very interesting little sweet spot where I think that it's approachable enough for relatively new players. Maybe I played Catan. I want to take a step up to something. Someone, maybe right off the street. There's a lot of mechanisms that might be a little bewildering, but if you have someone who is interested in trying a slightly heavier Euro, put this on kind of like the medium heavy, but doesn't want to go quite as far as a Lisboa or something like that. This is a great place for that, I think. And on the other hand, I think even for people who've been around for a while, there's just so many little pieces that are in this game that I haven't seen anywhere else. And I'm maybe not as widely traveled in the board game world as some, but I just feel like there's enough unique stuff here to make it intriguing for someone who's been around the block a lot. So I think it has this wonderful little sweet spot where it can kind of appeal to both audiences, plays in a reasonable time at a bunch of different player counts, has a unique theme. I think it's, I see it turning up on some hidden gem lists every once in a while, and I think by definition it's not going to turn up that often, otherwise it wouldn't be a hidden gem. But I think it certainly deserves that title of a game that people have kind of found and they said, oh, why isn't this more popular? And I think it definitely fits that bill.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think it's definitely a step above a next step sort of a gateway game,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not too far of a step. If you've got
No,
someone
no.
who's really intrigued by what the hobby has to offer, this is a really good representation of what a modern Euro has to offer, which is a lot of choices, a lot of interesting and cool mechanisms that are going to grab your attention and have you thinking. It's a highly interactive, which is unusual for a lot of Euros, but at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, it's a generally a positive feeling. You're
Hmm.
not getting punished. As you said earlier, you're not losing points. You're always moving forward. It's just a question of how far forward are you moving. So that tends to engender good feelings in a player. You feel like you're
Hmm.
accomplishing things, and so I think that you're correct in that it's a unique enough game on a number of different levels that I think it does deserve a place in people's collections if you are a fan of this style of game. So
Hmm.
absolutely, absolutely, I would endorse your endorsement. There we go. It's double
Thank you.
endorsed. So, Mark, I want to thank you again for your patience as we've worked through technical difficulties, and we're going to really hope that this stream here that we're doing from StreamYard to YouTube is going to be awesome and seamless, and it's going to save the way it's supposed to. Um, and I can edit all this out later. But yeah, I want to thank you for agreeing to be on the show and take that step to raise your hand and say, hey, I'd be willing to talk about this because it's always nice to get somebody new on the show. So thank you very much for volunteering.
Oh, it has been my pleasure. I'm really glad to see the long view continuing. It's always something I look forward to getting in my podcast feeds, and I get to share the stage with my board game hero Eric Brocious, and so it's a little bit of a fun bit for me.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, Eric is a great ambassador for the hobby, isn't he?
Hmm. Oh yeah, fantastic. He just seems so. It's for someone who's played games as long as he has and as much as he has. He just seems so enthusiastic. As enthusiastic as the first person who gets their first game of Catan or Dominion is about the game. He still has that kind of you know youthful kind of exuberance about it, which I just find so inviting. I just love that.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I've been really grateful for all the shows that he's done and that he and Joe Huber have done. Always a blast talking to those guys, just for the sheer depth of knowledge, as you said, but also that enthusiasm, which shines through. So, yeah, thanks a lot for agreeing to be on. And I want to say, a shout out again to Joel Eddy for helping out with some technical issues here, and to TC and to Joe for their support of the show, and looking forward to having them back soon. And I want to also send a thank you out there to my friend Carmen over there at Game Surplus. GameSurplus.com is still a great place for you to go and see if you can find the latest, greatest board game, and also the hard to find sort of imports. That's something that Game Surplus is always sort of taken on as a specialty, and it's as true today as it was back when Thor still owned the store. And so I really appreciate their service to the board game community and the things that they offer that are very unique in terms of their customer service and care and the curating of the games that they're bringing over from Germany and from other places for us to enjoy here in the States. So give a little shout out to them as well. So for Mark and myself, I want to say thanks again to everybody out there for listening, and have a great night. Okay, I'm going to hit end broadcast. Bloop. End it. Yes, end it. All right. Now, can you still